The first time you hear the line richer than a Lannister, it almost feels like a mistake. Not because we, as viewers, can't imagine Dunk becoming important someday, but because inside this world, that sentence doesn't even compute. In Westeros, being rich isn't abstract. It's very visible with things like banners, gold, castles, and even armies. And the Lannisters are the most obvious example of that kind of wealth. So everyone knows what Lannister money looks like. So when someone tells Dunk he'll be richer than a Lannister, the instinctive reaction isn't curiosity, it's outright dismissal. And that's exactly how Dunk reacts. He laughs it off, not because he lacks imagination, but because from where he's standing, the idea is genuinely ridiculous. I mean, look at his life at this point. He's broke, and he's sleeping outdoors, literally under a tree. He's borrowing armor, counting coins, and he's worrying about whether he can even afford to stay at the tourney another day. So there is nothing in his circumstances, whether it's socially, financially, or politically, that puts him anywhere near the same universe as Lannister wealth. And that's important, because the show isn't asking us to disagree with Dunk's reaction. It wants us to share it, because from within the logic of this world, the claim feels wrong, which is why the line lands the way it does. It's not there to inspire Dunk. It's there to create resistance and to make both him and the audience immediately reject it. And I think that rejection is the whole point, because if the line were meant to be taken at face value, it wouldn't need to sound so impossible in the first place. So if this prophecy clearly isn't talking about money, then what exactly is it measuring? What rich usually means in Westeros. In this world, wealth is rarely abstract. It's very practical and transactional. Rich doesn't mean fulfilled or respected. It just means protected. So the coin buys safety, silence, and the ability to make problems disappear before they ever become public. And if you have enough of it, rules soften. Consequences also slow down, and people listen longer than they should. That's the baseline assumption everyone in Westeros operates under. And you can see it baked into everything around Dunk. Tournaments aren't just celebrations of skill, they're financial machines. They exist to display power, to forge marriages, settle debts, and to attract favor. So in this episode, the Ashford tourney only exists because too much money was spent trying to project stability that isn't really there. The pageantry is already covering a hole. That's why Plummer's offer makes sense inside the system. He isn't behaving like a villain. He's behaving like a realist. Money has been overspent. Winter has weakened their flocks. And a reputation needs repairing. So the solution isn't honor, it's just leverage, or a fixed outcome, and a controlled loss disguised as spectacle, where everyone gets paid, and no one asks questions later. This is what rich usually looks like here, not in terms of virtue, but margin for error. And crucially, this is the world Dunk is being invited into, not as an equal, but as a tool. So someone whose lack of status makes him flexible, and someone poor enough that reward sounds like mercy, and compromise sounds like survival, which is why what comes next matters. Because Dunk isn't observing the system from the outside anymore. He's just standing right in the middle of it and being asked to decide what kind of wealth he's actually willing to accept. The rigged win as the first definition of wealth. The first real definition of wealth the episode gives us doesn't come from prophecy. It comes from Plummer. And what's important about that conversation is how reasonable it sounds. Plummer doesn't approach Dunk like a villain twirling his mustache. He approaches him calmly, politely, and almost respectfully. He frames the offer as something practical and even generous. So here's the breakdown. Lord Ashford has overspent. Winter has hurt the flocks, and the household needs to recover. Now Dunk, whether he realizes it or not, is standing in the perfect position to help them do that. What Plummer lays out is a version of success that fits perfectly within the world Dunk is trying to enter. He will get money in his pocket, a full set of arms and armor, legitimacy as a champion, and most importantly, a faster path out of Hedge Knight obscurity. And crucially, Dunk isn't being asked to throw a fight. And I find that very interesting because Plummer is careful about how the deal is framed. Dunk doesn't have to lose. He doesn't even have to change what he intends to do. All he has to do is unhorse Serandro, something Plummer openly acknowledges Dunk is capable of. The dishonesty doesn't belong to Dunk. It just belongs to the system around him, the betting, the odds, and the quiet understanding that Andrew will take the fall. So in other words, Dunk is being offered wealth without direct guilt. And this is a reward without visible consequence, with honor technically intact. This is how the world usually works. It's not about cheating openly, it's about benefiting quietly and letting other people bend the rules so you don't have to. And from the outside, this is an incredibly clean offer, especially for someone who is broke, sleeping under a tree, and worried about where his next meal is coming from. Plummer even spells that part out. Dunk has nothing to fall back on. He has no house, no land, and no family name to protect him if things go wrong. Which means this offer isn't just about profit. It's about safety and about securing a future before the world has a chance to crush him. But most importantly, this is wealth as Westeros understands it. And that's why this moment matters so much. Because before the prophecy ever gets a chance to mean anything, the episode shows us exactly what Dunk is being asked to accept, and exactly what kind of riches he's expected to want. And Dunk's reaction tells us immediately that this version of wealth is something he cannot take. What Dunk refuses and what he actually protects. When Dunk says, "I do not want a victory that I have not earned," it can sound simple, almost naive, and like pride talking. But that line isn't about pride at all. It's about identity. Because up to this point, Dunk has almost nothing in the world that can't be taken from him. He has no land, no title, and no powerful family name. What he does have is a single fragile thing, which is the belief that whatever place he earns in this world will be real. And the offer Plummer makes threatens that in a way Dunk immediately understands, even if he can't fully articulate it. Because once a victory is bought, even indirectly, it stops belonging to you. And if Dunk accepts the rigged win, everything that follows depends on things like silence, on other people keeping their mouths shut, and on the story never being questioned. His reputation would exist only as long as the lie holds. And the moment it doesn't, everything he gained collapses at once. That's the trap Dunk sees instinctively. The episode makes this clear by what Plummer emphasizes. He doesn't just promise coin, he promises arms, armor, and advancement. Things that look like stability, but all of it comes with an unspoken requirement, which is compliance. And once Dunk benefits from the system's dishonesty, he belongs to it. He can't object later. He also can't claim the moral high ground when it matters. And Dunk knows, even here, that he won't survive that kind of life. Not because he's too honorable to compromise, but because he's too exposed. A hedge knight doesn't get to be half clean. He doesn't get the protection that comes with rank or wealth. If Dunk's legitimacy is ever questioned, there's nothing underneath to catch him. There will be no second chance, or any form of cover up. So when he initially refuses the offer, he isn't choosing poverty over riches. He's choosing solidity over speed. He's also protecting the one thing that can't be bought later, which is the ability to stand by his own actions without fear of what might be uncovered. He's choosing a future where his worth doesn't depend on someone else's secret. And the episode doesn't frame this as noble triumph. It frames it as a risk. Because once Dunk refuses this path, the world doesn't reward him for it. It doesn't even adjust to his values. It just simply moves on and leaves him to face the consequences of staying honest in a system that doesn't value it, which leads directly to what the episode shows us next. Because choosing not to be owned by wealth doesn't make Dunk safe. It just makes the cost of his choices unavoidable. How Dunk gains without taking. What's easy to miss on a first watch is that Dunk doesn't actually stop gaining things after Plummer's offer enters the picture. He just never moves toward the shortcut. At this point in the episode, Dunk hasn't made a final decision. He's told to think on it. The choice is still open. But even before that choice is resolved, something important is already happening. Dunk's behavior is quietly setting the terms of who he is and what kind of path he's on. And I think once you look back over the episode with that in mind, a pattern starts to form. It's subtle, but it's still consistent. Dunk gains Egg's loyalty not because he promises him anything or because he presents a plan, but because Egg watches him hold the line when no one would have blamed him for bending it. Egg sees that Dunk's sense of right and wrong doesn't shift based on convenience, and that matters to a boy who is constantly surrounded by people calculating outcomes, weighing advantage, and hedging responsibility. He gains public trust in small, almost invisible ways, not through spectacle or victory, but through restraint and through how he speaks, and the fact that he doesn't posture or inflate his importance. People don't cheer him yet, but they notice him. And in this world, being noticed for the right reasons is very rare. Most importantly, Dunk becomes legible to authority figures. That's another key shift. Dunk doesn't gain protection because he's powerful. He gains it because his actions make sense inside the system. And even before his fate is decided, his choices read as coherent. His behavior is also predictable, and his honor isn't performative. When things later spiral out of control, the people in power hesitate. Not because they like him, but because he doesn't register as a liability. And that hesitation matters, because in a world where power usually moves quickly and brutally, hesitation is a form of wealth. It buys time, and it creates space. It also opens the door for outcomes other than destruction. So none of this is purchased. These things accumulate slowly, the way real foundations do. That's the inversion the episode is quietly pulling off. The world around Dunk keeps offering him ways to get ahead faster. But every time Dunk resists the shortcut, even before making a final choice, he gains something that can't be stripped away later without exposing the system itself. Which brings us back to the prophecy, now that we understand what the show is actually measuring when it uses that word. What richer than a Lannister actually measures? By the time the episode reaches this idea again, it becomes clear that the prophecy isn't measuring wealth the way the world usually does. It's not talking about possession or permanence. When people in Westeros talk about being rich, they almost always mean something you can point to. So things like gold, lands, armies, and influence that flows directly from money changing hands. That kind of wealth looks solid, but the episode reminds us how fragile it actually is. Lannister wealth can be lost. It can also be stolen, or collapse with a single political shift, a bad alliance, or the wrong war. It's inherited, defended, and constantly under threat. But what Dunk is accumulating works in the opposite direction. He's building something that doesn't live in a vault or a ledger. It lives in how people remember him, and how his actions are repeated, spoken about, and carried forward by others. His wealth isn't something he spends. It's something that records itself over time. So things like reputation, credibility, and honor that doesn't need to be declared because it shows up consistently in moments where it costs him something. And that kind of wealth doesn't collapse when the man is gone. In fact, it only fully exists after he is. That's the uncomfortable part of the idea, and it's why the line sounds absurd at first. Because the prophecy isn't promising Dunk comfort or security or even happiness. It's saying that what he builds will matter longer than what he enjoys. His value isn't in what he owns, but in what survives him. That's why the comparison works. Not because Dunk will ever rival a great house in power or luxury, but because what he leaves behind can't be taken, undone, or erased without unraveling the story itself. And the episode is already proving that in the background, long before Dunk understands it himself.